Hey, it's Jeremy, Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, and I share my creative process here with you on the internet. If you'd like to support this channel, get to read my comic books for free online, see additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/GERIMI, patreon.com/Jeremy. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, get a taste of what my comic book work is like, get some cool work in progress animated GIFs and blog posts delivered to your inbox once a month, you can sign up for my monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comics, or if you read digitally on Kindle or Comixology, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my self-contained graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It is a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. I am the artist and writer. Self-contained story, black and white, 144 pages. Or you can pick up Volume 1 of Morning Star, Lucifer's Fall from Heaven told as a Western. The entire series is 8 issues. This volume has issues 1 through 4 in it, plus bonus material. A little bit of script excerpt, some sketchbooks. And if you go to my main site, my main hub, where you can connect to all the different social media that I'm on, different channels, every way possible to connect with me. I also pick up some art prints. You can find the final issue of Morning Star issue 8. It's the conclusion of this series. It's available in print from Jeremy.net, also available digitally from Comixology. All right, so let's get into today's stream. I see Amaris is already on the chat. Says she made a sketchbook from a Dollar Tree canvas board. Cool, congratulations. Always nice to find new ways and venues to create sketchbooks. Just trying to figure out where to sit these books. Usually I have tons of desk space, or I try to sit stuff out before my live stream. But I am very off my game today. I decided for some random, well, it wasn't a random reason. I decided not to have any coffee yesterday because I've been having trouble sleeping a lot. And I thought, it used to be that I didn't drink coffee on the weekends. That would just be my thing. Like, I drink coffee during the week. The weekends I kind of detox from it. But I've gotten into the habit of drinking coffee on the weekends just because, at a certain point, coffee just gets a hold of you and you start craving it. So let me switch here, bring up my my screen. Anyway, I decided yesterday to go without coffee, just let my body kind of detox from it. And I was sleepy and sluggish all day. I didn't get any of that caffeine withdrawal headaches that people sometimes get. So I didn't get that, but I was super sleepy all day. I slept in super late this morning. I'm still kind of getting my sea legs back under me, even though I've got a cup of coffee here right next to me, but I haven't had the time to drink much of it yet. So, see, Amara says she sold 3 sketchbooks she made and kept a 4th one for herself. I am happy to hear that. Congrats. So, the piece that I have in front of you, the aforementioned Morning Star, Volume 2, the second half of the series. I've been working on the cover off and on the live stream. So as far as I'm concerned, this piece is pretty much done. And I can even show you with the trade dress. So I have the trade dress on a layer in here. So this is pretty much what the cover for the Volume 2 is going to look like. But what I may do is I'll take this in a separate file, flatten the artwork, and then just scale it up a little bit to see what happens if I push it and make Morning Star, make Lucifer larger on the cover. I haven't really decided yet whether I want to have him this large or whether I like it with it a little bit farther out. So we'll see. But yeah, for the most part, this is pretty much done. And I have not had a chance to set it up on my website yet, but I'm going to make a print of this available first. So that's one of the things I've been telling myself is try to make covers that I would want to sell as a print. I think it's a cool standalone image. And this is one that I think, for me, it meets that standard. So if I could just show you how it came out. Let's see. Mara says she's working on more sketchbooks. Doghouse says hello. Thanks for rolling in there. Good to see you. Let me see, I'm gonna just zoom in so you guys can see a little bit more of the detail. And this is one of those things where if you actually zoom in, this cover is going to be the same size, same size trade. It's a 5.5 by 8.5 inch trade paperback. So it's kind of a manga, large manga digest. So it's about that size. When you zoom in on this, the details are actually pretty small. Like the brushwork itself is not particularly tight, but if I zoom this all the way out, it's about, maybe it's a little bit smaller than the size of the cover. So from this, it actually works. If I zoom it in about this big, this is probably about how big it'll actually be in print. So yeah, even though the brushwork is kind of loose, it's one of those where the piece itself, I try to make the file large enough that when I shrink it down, that it'll all kind of come together and look more expressionistic than just slap it. So this piece is done. What next? You know what? Your guess is as good as mine. I've been in a really weird headspace lately in terms of like, I know I've got another comic book series brewing, but I've been really dilly-dallying on the writing. I've been trying to make some prints out of some of my figure drawings from my figure drawing class, and I keep working on that, but I haven't been putting them up for sale. I think I need to start getting out of my own way and just producing work and finishing stuff. So one of the other things I was thinking about, working on today, anyway, was so you guys saw me working on a Medusa piece earlier, and I got two different ones that you can see here. So I've got the one where she's looking straight on, and I've got one in her in shadow looking off to the right. And I think what I want to do now is what I've been telling myself. Another thing that I need to do is to stop thinking in ones and twos. Because normally when I do a piece, I kind of go in and do a deep dive. I sit down, focus on that piece, draw tons of thumbnails, and explore all the little ins and outs so I get one single piece just right. And what I've been thinking I need to do, what I should be doing, is instead, when I draw one piece, to think of it in terms of doing a series of maybe doing 4 different pieces, 6 different pieces, 12 different pieces, whatever it is, to draw a series of thumbnails in one sheet. What I mean is, in the thumbnail stage, to not just thumbnail a single piece and all of its variations, but to take whatever the entire series I plan to make, however many that's going to be, and do thumbnails for all of them at once and work through all the iterations together. And I think that it might help where I can take something from one piece, add it to another. So I've got a few different sketches in here. And I think what I want to do now is take the existing images I have, cut this up and put it in the top corner of the page, and then just start experimenting with more thumbnails. So we're back in what we know as my safe space, thumbnailing. I love that. Love the hell out of thumbnails. But I'm just gonna sit here and thumbnail through a whole bunch of variations. So step 1, I'm gonna group my existing layers together. Step 2, I'm going to duplicate the group. Step 3, flatten the group. And then step 4, let's delete what I don't need. And to be honest, I may at some point come back and replace the print that I put on sale, because there's something about the rough sketch. And this is something I've been struggling with. I always seem to like my rough sketches more than my finished pieces. So the trick for me is how to keep the energy of that rough sketch. I think that's a problem that a lot of artists have, is how to keep the energy of the rough sketch in their finished pieces. For a lot of artists, it's how do I keep from stiffening up? But I think for me, the question is, how little finish can I do and still consider a piece finished? That's, I think, what it really is I'm trying to flip the script mentally. I don't know whether it's going to work. This isn't me speaking like, oh, this is a tried and true method. This is me I'm often deconstructing my own working methods and kicking them around and saying, well, is the thing that I believe about the way I work true? Is this process really the way that I work, or is this just a rhythm that I've fallen into out of convenience, or it happened to be successful for a couple of pieces? I see more folks rolling into the chat. I see Amar's in here. What's up, Amar? Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for rolling in. I was talking about deconstructing my working methods. So this whole idea of doing multiple thumbnails at one time is, yeah, it's an experiment. We're gonna see how it goes for me. You know what? And I think one of the things I'm gonna do first, let me get rid of this. I think what I'm gonna do is let me zoom out real quick. And greetings from Amar. He also says happy Sunday to me and to everyone else. So happy Sunday to all who are joining us. I am going to pop out real quick, rotate this, pop back in, and now I got to go in and scale this down. And I'm just doing this so that I can use more of the screen while I'm drawing with you guys. It's a little bit weird. When I'm drawing on my own, I tend to work portrait. When I'm working digitally, when I'm live streaming, I work landscape unless the actual piece I'm working on is portrait, in which case, like if I'm working on the cover for Morningstar, I have to work portrait. So, but in this case, in a thumbnailing scenario, why not turn it sideways so you guys can see more of what I'm doing while I'm doing it? So I've got basically rough sketches for 2 1/4 piece right here, because I really think this little shoulder that's looking over, that's not much yet. But I'm just gonna see what happens if I take this whole concept and see how many different thumbnails I can generate out of this. I mean, I'm aiming for 6 because that's kind of what I imagine this series being, but we'll see where I end up. So I'm just taking these little pieces and moving them around. And I think what would also be helpful, another reason why I think this idea of sketching multiple pieces at once, multiple thumbnails at once, what I think is helpful for me is that at the time that I first had this idea, I had multiple thoughts of poses, of compositions for this this series. And now that I'm coming back to it, all I have are the little things that I sketched out. I don't have all of that. Like I saw a sea of different Medusas in shadow. Like I just, a wide variety of them. And now that I'm coming back to this, you know, for the most part, a lot of those are gone. So I think what would behoove me is to be able to get down all of those different variations, all those ideas at one time. So even though I'm working with a lot of space around me, I'm gonna kind of zoom in here a little bit. And I think at first, touching this piece up a little bit isn't necessarily even a matter of, oh, there's things in here that I have unfinished I want to make sure I get. It's almost like this is a way to ease myself into a new drawing. Is to start by looking at an unfinished one and saying, all right, what in here have I neglected to do? What are some things I see that I'm like, oh, I could fix that up, I could tighten that up. So at first, it's just touching up the shadows here. So let's see here. Amar says, I plan to do a Medusa-like version of my character Lilith as well. Well, your Lilith definitely has the hair for it with those locks, those flowing locks she has coming out. I mean, Medusa, Gorgons are popular mythological creatures. I mean, that's why people have lots of tattoos of them, different art pieces. You know, it's a very powerful visual motif. That's a little too dark. I think the whole idea that I originally started with that I was liking was head in silhouette, face, or head in silhouette, body in light. That was sort of what I was starting with this whole series. So for all of them, they've got this light raking across the figure. And then once I get all of that done, like the thumbnails done, figure, yeah, I have a whole series. This look. Amar says, I need to start my soup soon. Go get that food ready, man. All right. So I don't even know what I have in mind for this one, with her now turned facing facing to the left, but looking from her back. I will tell you that I feel like I want her neck to be longer. I also feel like I really need to, at this stage, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to knock back the whole figure really light. By knock back, I mean erase out a lot of what I have here so I can draw on top of it. Because working digitally, I've been trying to get myself into that habit. It used to be that I would just draw at whatever pressure I want, but I would set my thumbnail layer at a really light opacity so that it could never get too dark. And I'm not saying I'm done with that methodology, but I am going back and forth between that method of limiting how dark my thumbnails can get no matter what, versus just drawing with a light brush and letting the image, the sketch, whatever it is, build up. So in this case, I am back to the build-up method. Amar says, will they all be portrait pinup posters? Yeah, I think so. I'm not going to stop myself from doing a landscape piece if a landscape composition comes to me. But I'm initially designing the whole set in terms of portrait. That said, if I were to decide to do landscape, what I probably want to do, and you right there, just by doing this in the live stream, you've contributed to my process. Because now I'm thinking maybe what I'll do is 3 portrait and 3 landscape. So I'm going to sketch out a couple of landscape ones just to see how they look like. I think that with the portrait compositions, what works well is the idea of the light just sort of raking across the image, and I'm not sure how that will play out in a landscape composition, but we're going to find out. So let's see. Can go a little bit lighter even. Drop this down to say 10%. The other thing is I need to remember to leave enough space in this composition for the snakes. So when I originally started that first sketch, I wasn't really thinking about the structure of the rib cage. I can see that just by the way I started my lines. And so now I'm trying to get the rib cage in place, get the neck in place, so I can kind of have her looking over her shoulder at us. You know what? And I don't I don't think that that's such a horrible thing. Sometimes just drawing and following the lines and coming in and adding structure later. But in looking at this drawing, I could tell that there was much less, it was much more shape and much less volume. And it would behoove me to kind of go back into this and impose some volume on the same concept. And maybe I want to push her shoulder up a little bit more. Because in the original thumbnail, I had her chin almost touching her shoulder. So you can kind of have this like her back is kind of coquettishly turned away from us, and she's sort of like, you know, looking back at us like that. That this shoulder, you're pretty much going to be just getting some shoulder blade. The shoulder itself is going to be disappearing around the corner. Give her a little bit more neck. Just brush down a little bit. Maybe this one's got the light coming from the front. I don't really know whether I want the light coming from the back or the front. I mean, from the left or the right. Now is probably the time where I want to start framing this composition. From here, I can kind of say, all right, let's say that the light that's coming across her body higher angle or lower angle? Well, the fact of the matter is that if the main surface that's turned towards us is her back, it still makes sense for the light to be coming from this direction. Because otherwise, I mean, I could do either one, or I could thumbnail out both. But the difference is if I have it coming from the left, then this mostly surface of her back that we see is what's going to be in shadow. Even if it's coming from the left side, even if it's coming from the front left, her back would still be turned away from us. So I feel like that is not necessarily what I want to get into concept-wise. Not that it's bad. I mean, I could do a piece from this series that that does that, but it's almost like making a game out of a composition. So I come up with an idea, meaning Medusa's face, head mostly in shadow, and her body in light. And then the game is, how many variations can I come up with that don't break that rule? And if I kept working at it, I mean, I'm sure I'd come up with endless variations. But how many variations that don't suck? That's the real question. How many variations can I come up with that actually make a compelling image? That's the true challenge. So at this point, I can start seeding the image with snakes. Make her cheekbones a little bit higher. I can zoom in closer. Normally, a lot of the time when I'm working kind of zoomed out, it's more of that's how it helps me keep from getting lost in thumbnails too soon. But I realize when drawing with an audience that you guys might be like, I'd really like to see what you're doing there because it just looks like little bits of scratching here and there. So I think what I'll probably end up doing is moving in and out of the composition a lot more so I can work the way I do in terms of thinking broadly and then come in so you can see some of what I'm doing. I'm already getting a little bit lost in the face, which I try to leave that for last. Because if I get everything else working, then I can just take my time and say, all right, if the face isn't quite right, just keep playing with it. Whereas if I get a face that's perfect, but I have to, I've mentioned this before, it's real easy to get caught up if you have a face that you really like. You will struggle and struggle and struggle to try and make the drawing work. When in the end, it's that, oh, I need to change the angle that the head is positioned. And that means you're going to have to redraw the face anyway. And we will fight, artists will fight tooth and nail to not have to redraw a face once we get a good one, because getting a good face is real damn hard. So I always just save that for the last, because if anything else requires me to change the composition, they're sort of like, well, I haven't invested too much time in the face. Anything else that you invest time into, arms, legs, torsos, the stance, you will change all of those things. You're like, oh, okay, it's not right, let me fix it. When you've got a head that you're really happy with, but you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to change that now, you will fight so hard to not make that change. And in fighting it, you're fighting the piece, and you end up wasting even more time making the piece worse, trying to contort yourself into knots. Whereas if you had just said, all right, I'm gonna have to draw a new face, let me change this position, you do it. Which is the reason why I stopped noodling on the face. I'm gonna save that for later. At this point, it's simple enough to just keep playing around here with the snakes to like get them all. I haven't really drawn much of them yet. In fact, here's an idea. For some reason, in sketching this out, I imagined the serpent, one of the serpents, just encircling her eyes. I can make these thicker so I can do the. Oh, that's too thick. Serpent kind of making its way down her back. Now here's a tangent that I did not make intentionally. That serpent that's wrapping its way around her eyes. It's hitting this border between light and dark. And I have to decide, do I want to push it down further below, peeking out of the darkness, or do I want to pull it up and then have another serpent coming out and around? The nice thing is I can almost design these serpents so that they feel a little bit like a tattoo. And you know what that just did is that just gave me an idea for a serpent, a Medusa getting a bald woman, getting serpents tattooed onto her neck and then coming out of her head like the tattoos are coming to life. So that might be another composition right there. In fact, the whole point of doing all this is to have multiple concepts going at once. So I think I'm going to try that. I think for this one, well, I was going to try and do another horizontal one, or I was going to try to switch to horizontal pieces. But the way I see this in my head, I see it vertical. But maybe there's a way to make it horizontal. Start with the skull. I'm going to try and center this so that I can leave some room for the serpents. So what I'm trying to envision here is sort of the back of her head. Oof, I'm putting a lot of lines in here. And sometimes it's necessary to think your way through a piece. But as you guys have heard me say before, I get a little bit too sloppy with that. So I do make an effort to try and streamline a little bit. think the way that I'll try and do this is the backside of her skull will be sort of a nest of snake tattoos. Zoom in a little bit so you guys can see what I'm doing here. I think I'm gonna have to go a little bit darker to work this out. A little darker. So what I am thinking here is and I've already decided that the tattoo artist that's doing the ink is going to be a woman. So I'm gonna have to practice my drawing of female hands here. And I don't think that I'm necessarily going to get it in this thumbnail, but it is something that I'm thinking about. So let's say I've got the tattoo artist. Trying to think of a way to position this so that she can be working, holding the person's skull, but not have it interfering with the image that I'm making. Maybe her hand is, if I erase a little bit of this structure there, maybe I can put her hand, the tattoo artist's hand, one hand, her left hand, or I can make her left-handed. It's an idea. That simplifies everything. Sometimes you got to look for alternative answers. So let's say that I have her hand, the hand holding the gun. Trigger up there. I'm also gonna have to pull up photos of tattoo guns to get it right. There's tons of great illustrators who are also tattoo artists who are just like, shit, man, what you need reference for? I know what a tattoo gun looks like. But I do not. Just know there tends to be chambers up top for the ink, or a chamber rather. Little rubber glove on her hands. Then just need to decide, do I want to have her hand down here or up here? It's a matter of where will it be the least in the way. What I'm trying to capture is the sense of the hand that's holding her head to have it like just off to the side and to the back. Should be the other hand. So the thumb, well, no, the problem is that the thumb is going to be facing towards us. So, but for me, what I'm trying to do, if you look at a little thumbnail of me, is just have the hand kind of off to the side, kind of holding the head while the other hand with the gun is going to work. So I'm trying to get, let's say her wrist is up here. Got the index finger. So her fingers are kind of wrapping around the skull. So I'm going to have to play with the position of the serpents there. This is one of those where I may work this out in multiple compositions because this piece is complex enough that I could do this in a few different ways. Try and work out which one's the best. Serpent coming back around her shoulder. Yeah, this one is it's a weird piece, but hey, that happens sometimes. The ideas just flow, and you're like, I want to follow them, see where it goes. The idea here, let's see here, getting that sense of the snakes being inked onto her head. Maybe even one of them is curling around the inside of the tattoo artist's wrist. It's an idea. But this one is just like a bad tangent. It's just sort of sitting there right on top of the hand. So I'm going to change the position. This one is out too far from the action, just sort of dangling out there in space. I'm going to have to bring that one in a little bit more. It goes in, then up, and then toward the viewer somewhat. It's like I never make things easy for myself. I just think of, oh, I'm going to do someone whose tattoos are coming to life. And I don't think about the fact that that transition from two-dimensional to three-dimensional is a very challenging thing to get read to make it read properly on an image. Never mind the fact that I don't draw realistically, because I think that artists who do realism would have quite a bit of an advantage in a concept like this, because if you draw, if your style tends to use a lot of realism, you just draw the snake, the snakes that are coming up overhead. You get your reference, you draw your snakes the way you would draw them, and then when you are drawing the tattoos, you just make it look like a flattened two-dimensional object that is rendered along the surface. I think in my case, where my style is more graphic, more comic booky, more illustrative, that it is a lot harder to make that transition between two-dimensionality and three-dimensionality read. Because to a certain degree, everything I draw is more graphic, more two-dimensional. Like I always say, it's not that I have a disdain for realism. I think that realism and artists that can do realistic and photorealistic art are amazing. I have tried it before. It's just not my forte. I do believe that a lot of it is just putting in the years and the work and developing that craft. But that said, while I have a great respect for it and I think that it's very, very hard, it's also something that I'm generally not as interested in making that kind of art. When I look at my favorite artists, they don't tend to be realists. They tend to be expressionistic. But this is a case where I'm looking at it and I can clearly see how realism would be very, very useful in this. And I think having a grasp of realism is useful for any artist. One of my favorite art books is James Gurney's Imaginative Realism. And I've learned a tremendous amount from that book about how to make my more two-dimensional graphic pieces have more volume and substance, and just lending a bit more volume and realism to something that is more illustrative can make that two-dimensional piece. You can just make it work better. I don't need to get caught up because I'm going to tell you, I'm going to have to spend a lot of time working on these hands, shooting some photo reference. Might get my wife to pose, put some gloves on her hands, and have her pose as the hand model for this. I should get her to pose for the Medusa as well, but she's got too much hair. I used to have a couple of mannequins that I rarely use and I got rid of. And it's funny because having her holding the mannequin's head would be the perfect reference for this. But my studio space was just getting so cluttered that I thought I need to get rid of anything that I'm not actively using. And I just really hadn't used those mannequin heads for anything in a long time. I thought, all right, get rid of them. But you know what? That's always the way. There's always going to be stuff that you're going to get rid of. And as soon as you get rid of it, you're like, God damn it, I should have kept it. Right now, this piece is lending itself actually to a square composition. It's not lending itself to horizontal or vertical. Sometimes when I don't know what I'm going to do with the piece, I will just start drawing it and just see where, if it ends up lending itself to something that's wider rather than taller. And right now, this piece, it could go landscape, but it could go vertical. It could go vertical too. It could go landscape or portrait. This little snake that's sticking out from her head, that's not doing anything for me. Now, what's funny is, when I originally started working on this, I was mentioning creating a rule, for lack of a better word, and then seeing how many pieces I can make that don't break that rule. I can tell you already that in drawing this piece, what makes it compelling is the serpents transforming, not having the head partially in shadow. So this piece is already breaking the rule, and I don't care because I like where it's going. I will also tell you that in the time that I'm drawing this, working this concept out, I'm already feeling kind of, when I'm doing figure drawing, I'm working from a model, there's a clock running in my head. When you're doing a 3-minute pose, a 5-minute pose, a 10-minute pose, mentally, I'm kind of counting. I'm not counting like 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, 5. But you get a sense for how much time you have left in a pose. And you get a sense for, when you're getting to the end of the amount of time allotted for that pose. And I will tell you that there is a lot more to work out in this particular illustration in terms of detail. But I also mentioned that I wanted to experiment with, let's see. I'm doing all these lines as I realize that I can really sell the idea of the serpent turning if I just draw the underbelly, and then have that underbelly, just that simple thing of you've got the underbelly of the snake exposed to us for a little bit, and then you go back to the bottom of the snake. Just by doing that alone gives you this sense. Let me zoom in a little bit. You can see what I did there. Just adding that little range right there, that gives it the sense of, oh, that's a 3-dimensional object. And then when we get down here, I can go more graphic, and it feels more like something that's drawn onto a flat surface. So these are little things that I'm thinking about. But my point being, I'm not done with this concept. I haven't even figured out what the orientation is going to be of the image. And I'm hesitant to pull it closer to make more room since I don't know. But first off, we're already at 54 minutes. And I've got 2 pieces I've kind of sketched out here that I like. What I want to do is start sketching another one. Because the point of this is to sit down and do a lot of thumbnails, not just labor over one thumbnail. To come in here and really say, all right, how many different ideas can I get out of this? So what I'm thinking in terms of a landscape piece now. And it may be that I will come back and draw all of these and say, you know what, they're all portrait. The landscape ones just aren't working for me. But let's see what happens if I give it an attempt at a landscape piece. And I was gonna start with doing the face looking directly up. And I realized instead, because I have, the first one has Medusa looking directly, I can make this dark while I'm drawing it. I can make this one has Medusa looking directly at the viewer. This one has her looking to the right. This one has her looking to the left. This one also has her looking to the left. So what I'm thinking about now is the variations of the ways that she's looking. So got one to the right, two to the left. I guess I could do one with her looking straight forward. But my initial instinct was to draw her looking up, was to have her looking straight up, but I feel like instead I want to have her looking up and to the right now. And it's not necessarily that there's some magic formula. It's just trying different angles, different poses, so that if these are going to be a series, that they're not all just, I don't want to make them too similar. I want to make each one different enough that someone would be interested in, like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's different. So these are the things I think about when I'm working on a set or a series. You know, whereas if I'm making comics, I want the way the characters are looking to be consistent in all panels. And if I'm changing the angle, it's because the character is actively turning to look at another character, or they're going to move in a different direction. So changing that, keeping the direction consistent is, you know, that's more narrative. Varying it is more illustrative. So let's try now. Bring that opacity way back down like I had it. We're going to have her looking towards us. Up and to the left. So if this was a box that I was drawing, a tiny little box I'm putting there in the corner. This little thing up here. So the white surface is the surface that I'm thinking of as her face. You know, and just in drawing this diagram, I don't know, like I literally don't know what the piece is going to turn out as, but I do realize that I want to move this head down a little bit so I have some space for the snakes, because I don't know where they're going to go. I'll leave myself some room to play with the composition. So let's see, I've got that. But what do I want to do with her shoulders? I want to have her shoulders square. I want to have her shoulders or rather, what do I want to do with her rib cage, not her shoulders? And is this too similar to anything I've done in the previous ones? Let's say I've got one arm coming forward. I mean, I could just go through and look at some pieces of the old masters and take like an old masters composition. Take a, you know, I love me some Rubens. I could take some Rubens. Ever since I went into the Louvre in Paris and I saw the Medici cycle in person, which is a giant 24 painting narrative of the of Queen Mary Medici, Marie Medici. And ever since I saw that piece, I've often felt like Rubens is one of, if not the best storyteller in the fine arts. Like, it's just his visual storytelling, puts pretty much any comic artist to shame. My point being is that, when you steal a composition from a living artist, someone who's working right now, you're ripping them off. When you take one of the old masters, one of the best artists in history, who is no longer alive and working, and you do a piece based on one of their compositions, and you say, I have chosen this piece for this particular reason, because it accentuates the theme that I want to do, or I specifically am interested in this piece and I want to see what happens if I change the theme from, say, the Battle of the Amazons to, Attack of the Gorgons, and make it like a whole army of Gorgons. Let's say that you decide you want to do that. That's an homage. Because one, you're acknowledging where it's coming from instead of saying you made it a whole cloth. And two, you're actually trying to explore, you're both trying to learn from what that artist did while adding something of your own. Because I think just doing a straight master study and saying this is a master study, but then saying, all right, I have duplicated a Rubens piece and now I'm going to sell it as my own. I don't think that's necessarily... Master studies are incredibly valuable, but I look at master studies as something that I'm doing for me personally, just to improve my craft. If I'm making a piece that I plan to sell, like these prints, I feel like I would need to add something to it. Doesn't mean I can't use a master study as a basis for it. Doesn't mean I can't start off basing it off of a Rubens or a Da Vinci or Michelangelo. But in that process, I want to add something. And maybe that adding something is still me mostly letting the existing masterwork do the heavy lifting for me. I'm not saying that that's like, oh yeah, I turned them all into Medusas, so now, I'm the genius. No, they're still doing all the heavy lifting. But trying to make something about it different. And now we come back to the compositional thing again. The light breaking across the face. So even before I get into drawing the snakes, I'm back to that compositional rule that I was working on. And now I think this piece does work as a horizontal piece. Although, what I need to do is change where I have this positioned, because I want to give it a little bit more room on the left-hand side. Why? So I can add the hands. Why? Because if I cut it off right at the wrists, then it looks like I'm trying to hide or avoid drawing hands. And yeah, I'm arrogant enough that I feel like, first off, no, I have not mastered drawing hands. I don't draw great hands. I draw okay hands. If I pay attention, I can draw good hands. But I'm not a master of them where every time I draw a hand, people are like, damn, that's a good ass hand. No. But that's exactly why I'm not going to have people trying to call me. I'm not, okay, nobody's coming for me. I don't need to worry about people calling me out on things. More often than not, if I do a piece that's not that successful, no one calls me out on it. Just ignore it. They're just like, oh, it's not an interesting art piece. And they just move on to whatever's in their Instagram feed. No one's sitting there waiting for my next piece to drop so they can critique me. No one's doing that. But knowing how other artists think, when you see someone crop a piece and they crop it right at something that's generally difficult to draw, you presume that they are trying to hide something or run from drawing that thing. So that is why when I'm conceiving this, I'm specifically going to give myself a little bit of space to add the hands so that no one's going to say, oh, he's trying to not draw, he's trying to avoid drawing hands. And if I drop this arm a little bit, I can avoid having a tangent there. And I can actually make her arm, the other arm, coming towards us a little bit more so that that can be what she's resting her arm on. Now this right here, this change of composition in terms of like how I'm finishing it off, this is definitely 110% from doing figure drawing. Looking and saying, all right, how does the model's body naturally come together? Because when you're watching the model coming into the pose, usually they're coming in and figuring out, they're settling in and they're figuring out, oh wait, we put this here, that there. And they're trying to find a pose that's both elegant and that won't be agony for them to hold for however long the pose is supposed to last. And in looking at this, I'm seeing places where I can say, all right, this is a logical pose that a model would take. In fact, I gotta frame it just right so that I can have that turn be interesting. And I think I'm definitely going to have, well, we'll see how it works. If it, I was going to have a serpent wrapping around her hand, I mean, wrapping around her wrist and then coming out from her hand. But it really depends on how well that concept either helps the composition or breaks it. Because if it breaks it, then it's got to go. But I think that it can help the foreshortening. It can definitely help the foreshortening to have a, an object curled around a wrist. With this shoulder a little bit higher, this breast will be up a little bit. Okay, so, hey, Paul's in the chat. Good to see you. He says, Procreate, I see. Yes, I'm working digitally here. And in fact, I was getting ready to mention that we were, unfortunately, you're coming here kind of at the tail end of this, because I'm probably going to wrap up this this live stream shortly. But I'll give you a quick rundown of what I'm doing. And basically, the Medusa pieces that I was working on, last month or a couple months ago, I had more than one idea for. So what I decided was I wanted to throw a bunch of pieces up at once and kind of thumbnail a series at one time. So the point of all of these is just to thumbnail variations on the theme and try to work up as many of them into what I hope would be a nice series of pieces. So the theme that I was doing with all of them is having Medusa's face in shadow and the snake silhouetted, and then having her body in light that's sort of streaming across. So the first one is the one that I ended up making a finished piece of, but I may make that again because obviously, oddly enough, even though it's done and it's available for purchase on my site, I'm still not 100% happy with it. I kind of want to take another stab at it. The second one is the one that I drew kind of at the same time, where I was just working out the variations of the theme. This third one is the one I just started with, where we're looking at her from the back, a back pose. And then this fourth one is probably the most different. And I had the idea of having an artist tattooing snakes onto a bald woman's skull, and then having those snakes transform into serpents. And I think I'm going to call it Medusa Inc. I mean, it's pretty on the nose name, but and now this last one here, one of the guys, Amar, in the chat had asked whether I was going to make them all pin-up portraits, and now he might have meant portraits as in just portraited, it's a portrait of a Medusa, but I took the question to mean portrait versus landscape. And I thought, well, let me see what happens if I intentionally try to do a couple of landscape compositions. Maybe I've got 3 portrait pieces and 3 landscape pieces. So this first one here, this last one I'm working on is the first, it's the second attempt at a landscape, because I originally was going to make the tattoo one landscape, but sometimes a concept takes on a mind of its own. And the inking one, the tattoo one, is, I think, such a unique piece that I don't want to try and cram it into portrait or landscape. I think I'm going to keep drawing it out until I'm happy with the image, and then figure out how to crop it later. Pavel says Medusa Inc. Nice, little mashing it together there. Yeah, so I'm giving myself the freedom with the tattoo one to just see where the composition wants to go. Whereas with this one, I'm intentionally saying, all right, I am going to try to render this concept as a landscape piece. And this is one of those things where I can definitely feel the work that I've been doing in figure drawing class is greatly informing the composition here. And I had added some space to the canvas so I can add the hands on. Not really space to the digital canvas, but I just moved everything over so I can draw the hands. Now the question is, where do I put the snake? I'm going to have a snake wrapping around. That's nice. Just have it sort of coming out of her hand, and then just have maybe the head is resting. These are some particularly long snakes. And this one does fall back into the original idea that I'd thrown down of head in shadow. The body in light. Yeah. See, I like what's going on with the serpent down here at the bottom, but it does kind of mess with the composition in the sense that I have to leave room down here. And it's a real question of, well, what do I do down here to make it visually interesting? What is she resting on? Like this arm that's up. What are her arms resting on? That's the real question. And I could make it real simple and just say I'm going to put a Greek column in there because that keeps with the mythological themes. And I could also frame her in the background with another column, another pair of columns. So I kind of frame her. You can have the serpents moving in and out of that. I don't think I tried to put a little twist to her torso, but I think it works better if I let her body keep going out this way with this length. And just have her body kind of twist. And most of this is going to be in shadow anyway, so it's not really that big a deal in terms of which way it is or isn't facing. Okay, let's see here. Pavel says the idea of the tattoo sounds freaking awesome. Well, you know what? I can't take credit for that one either because now that I think about it, I remember a long time ago, I worked at a different toy company, and we had met with Avi Arad, the producer. He was producer of a lot of the early Marvel movies, and he had mentioned that in the movie Elektra, the Jennifer Garner Elektra, not my favorite movie, and I do like Jennifer Garner, but you know, I just think that the story wasn't necessarily as compelling as Elektra is in the comics. That said, that there's a whole thing of like a bunch of villains chasing her who have tattoos that come to life. And I am far, far from the first artist to do a piece about tattoos of any kind coming to life. In fact, I'm pretty sure that somewhere in my art book collection, I've got a book called Fantasy Art Techniques of Boris Vallejo. If you guys don't know Boris Vallejo, you should definitely check him out. He's right up there, in my opinion, with Frazetta in terms of an amazing fantasy artist. Anyway, I am pretty sure that in that book somewhere there's a piece of a tattoo coming to life. So, you know, when I do something like this, yeah, I think it's a cool idea. And I wouldn't do it if I were just copying something that someone else did. But I am definitely not the first. I think that it's just me doing my own take on the idea of a tattoo coming to life. And that take happens to be, I think, a good piece. It fits in with the themes of the Medusas. But I definitely would not try to take credit for that as a novel concept. Definitely not. It's been done before, will be done again. But I'm glad that my approach to it is intriguing. And interesting now, you get this dynamic of you've got the large column in the front here, and then you've got the small. Well, you've got the large column that she's laying on in the front, and you have this much taller column, but it's farther in the background. So you're getting that contrast between the two. And now it's just a matter of figuring out what I want to do with the snakes. Let's see here. Amar says, are you familiar with Jacob Lawrence or any other Black artists? You thought maybe you can do Medusas in different art styles, celebrating Black artists or art styles you love. I am familiar with Jacob Lawrence, and I mean, I also like Thomas Blackshear, but he's a guy who I'm like, wow, I couldn't even come close to his style. So James Marshall is another that could be used as an inspirationist style. He says, are you thinking of Tattoo Man? He says, I have a character that has the whole body with tattoos, but they're used for a different reason. And he said, Boris straight ripped on Frazetta's style for fancy work. He says, good, but he cloned his style like Kobe did Michael. Well, I don't know. I mean, the fact of the matter is I discovered Boris before I discovered Frazetta. So even if he did ape some of his style, you know, I have a warm place in my heart for Frazetta's for Boris's work, just because I discovered it so early in my life. You know, the idea of one artist ripping another, for me, the style isn't necessarily, the style is the surface. It's what you do with the images, what you say with them, that I think is interesting and unique. And I would say that Boris, his style always felt prettier to me. Like there was more optimistic work in it, whereas Frazetta's style always felt very brutal to me in a good way. I like it, but it's like Frazetta, like, you know, obviously he used a lot of his paintings for he did a lot of, you know, Conan pieces. There's something ultra high octane masculine about Frazetta stuff, where Boris felt like he could do a lot more, you know, not that Frazetta couldn't do delicate pieces, but it felt like in terms of the two, that I think was the major difference, just in the types of images they produced. But in terms of the character you mentioned, Tattoo Man, I'm not thinking of Tattoo Man. It was specifically, I don't know how familiar you are with Elektra, but there's a group of assassins called the Hand, which at various points have been her bitter enemies. At some point, she's been the leader of the Hand. It's changed a lot throughout Marvel history, as many characters do. But those were the characters with the tattoos in the Elektra movie. But again, the whole thing of like tattoos coming to life. Like I said, there's a Boris piece that I can think of. Many artists have done that theme. My point in bringing it up is not necessarily, it's not about calling out Boris. It's saying, hey, lots of people do this idea, and I don't want to take credit for, I don't want to claim that I'm taking credit for it as an innovative idea, because Boris is just one of many artists that I've seen who have done the theme of tattoos coming to life. And I think that there's a lot of Black artists that I could do homages to. But for me, the interest is not about mimicking other people's styles. Like I remember when I saw the pieces that you had posted, you were doing a lot of pieces in a variety of art styles, and I was blown away by that. That said, for me, I'm not particularly interested in working in a variety of styles. I'm impressed at people who can mimic a lot of different artists. But if I were going to mimic someone in particular, to be honest, it probably wouldn't be going through the history of my favorite Black artists. It would probably be more of mimicking the old masters, because that's more where my art interests lie. And that's something that I don't see enough of in art history. Whenever I see art history, there's a lot of expressionistic African-American art. There's a lot of work, and I've even said my work is expressionistic. But what I'm constantly trying to study from is the old masters. And I think what would be interesting is to do African themes with the work of the old masters. That's why when you were talking about Black artists, the first person that popped in my mind is Thomas Blackshear, because he's somebody who is definitely working in that illustrative academic drawing and painting after the style of the old masters. And that, I think, is just what appeals to me more than expressionistic work. And I refer to my work as expressionistic only in terms of comparing it to, say, illustrators who contemporary fantasy illustration, even if James Gurney isn't necessarily the influence that a lot of these artists are taking from, him coining that phrase, imaginative realism, I would say that most of what I see in terms of contemporary fantasy illustration would fit into that mold of imaginative realism. And I would say that my style is expressionistic in comparison to imaginative realism. I guess I'm always going to be chasing the old masters because I honestly, in terms of like actual craft, you know, I feel like that is the pinnacle of draftsmanship. I've actually been wanting to get some books on the Harlem Renaissance because when I look at Black artists, I think the work that I see that's praised is work that has a more tribal influence. And I think that that's more of, culturally something that maybe I could do more of in terms of exploring our actual roots as Black artists. But I don't see as many. That's something I wanted to look at, just in the Harlem Renaissance, doing a deep dive and seeing who are Black artists that have studied the old masters, and it shows in their works, because I don't see that as much. I see that in contemporary Black illustrators. I don't see it as much in art history, and I want to kind of do a deep dive because I feel like that has to exist. It's got to. And it might be another case of where all of the great Black artists that who were influenced by the old masters just haven't been getting their shine. So let's see. Amar also says Boris did more fantasy or romance novel type art. Frazetta was more commercial and comic book. See, yeah, I think that that's another way to simplify what I was saying, where I was getting more into how it feels in terms of brutal versus delicate. You're just saying romance and fantasy versus commercial and comic book. Amar says the funny thing is a lot of the old masters borrowed from African culture. The sad thing in art history, Black or African art is not noted or put in that same part of history. It says, which is sad. I see that they did, but as far as what they did, it's recognized only by those that wrote the history. Yeah, I have a book that I was talking about months ago, and I haven't had a chance to start it yet, but it's called Invisible Ink. It's about Black comic book creators and the history of Black artists in comics. It's one of those where I bought it because I'm like, this is, as a Black comic creator, I need to learn more about my history. But I just haven't had time to read it yet. I've had it for many, many months. I bought it, I think, as soon as I heard it come out. I want to say Dan Shaheen had the author on as a guest on his live stream. But that's another book that I have and want to sit with and spend some time doing a deep dive on. And unfortunately, you know how it is, only so many hours in the day. The question is, how many serpents do I want to put in here? So this one, what's going to be the challenge is finding an interesting balance with the serpents, because now it feels like one of those where it'd be very easy for me to just fill in every blank space with a serpent. And what I want is to find an interesting visual pattern of snakes. But yeah, we're at an hour and a half here. Yeah, that's the book. Corey Kerr is in the chat. Hey, good to see you, Corey. Thanks for popping in. Yeah, Corey Kerr said, Invisible Ink is the title of another incredible book by Brian McDonald. Black author teaches storytelling. Invisible Ink is the book that I was thinking of. I don't know if you posted that while I was talking about it, but I've had Invisible Ink on my nightstand since it came out, and I just have not had a chance to read it yet. But that's another great book that I've been wanting to look at. Amar says, yeah, that was like when I heard of Floyd Norman. He says, I was shocked because for Black kids studying animation, that would have been a great story to tell. Yeah, it's one of those things where sometimes we don't hear about people till way after, when we're doing the deep dive. So, I mean, my point being is that I think that doing pieces in terms of doing a tribute to Black artists that whose style I think really resonates with me, it would probably be finding artists who studied the old masters and then you went on a starting point from the old masters forward. That said, like I said, I've been wanting to get a couple of good books on the Harlem Renaissance just to use that as a starting point and see. Like Jacob Lawrence is one who, yeah, I remember looking at his work when I was doing a paper on the Harlem Renaissance in college. But I, for the life of me, can't remember all the different artists whose work I looked at. And I kind of feel like I'm due to go back and give myself a refresher. But even with that, I think part of the thing that holds me back from doing a deeper dive into the history of Black illustrators is that I'm still trying to get a handle on the old masters. For me, I'm still, like you see, I'm working on that. I'm doing figure drawing classes every week, doing studies, the art book study group. Even that, the work from the art book study group, Walt Reed's work, is obviously influenced by the construction and structural level of the old masters. So I'm constantly trying to reach back and master those things. And you know what? What it comes down to is life just isn't long enough. I need 3 or 4 or 5 different lifetimes so I can just sit down and just take in the history of art. Just sit down and learn, not even worrying about what I'm making. Just spend a lifetime just learning. Let's see. Corey says, in terms of Invisible Ink, he says it's a phenomenal book. Dude has another one called Golden Theme. He says You Are a Storyteller is a fun podcast. I did not know that he had a podcast, so I am going to have to check that out. Let me grab a piece of scratch paper so I can make a note. Write that down. Normally my Post-it notes are always well within hand, but somehow they migrated over to my computer table. Let's see here. So thank you for that recommendation, Corey. I'm definitely going to check out that podcast. All right. So we've been going for 90 minutes here. Like I said, I've still got a lot to do. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different compositions here. My goal is to get to 6. So I've still got at least one more to do. And the fact of the matter is, I don't know whether the Medusa one, whether the ink one is going to end up being horizontal or vertical. So I may end up making it a series of 8, depending on how that goes. But yeah, for now, this is the first step in a new approach, trying to think in terms of thinking in series at the thumbnail level, before even diving in to doing layout sketches and doing variations. Just when I'm thumbnailing, to just not just thumbnail one piece, but to literally say, all right, I'm going to do a whole series. Okay. So Corey also says, in terms of, let me see, I'm going to throw this up. He says that he's an awesome guy, very responsive on Twitter. But yeah, the podcast, throwing that up there. You are a storyteller. For anybody who wants to go and check that out, I'm definitely going to check it out. And the book title again there, I'm going to throw that up on the screen. Invisible Ink is the title of another incredible book by Brian McDonald. Again, that's one that I own. I just haven't had time to sit down and read yet. For those who don't know, Floyd Norman, great animator. Definitely check out. There's a documentary on him that came out. Was it last year or the year before? I feel like it came out before the start of the pandemic. Okay, guys. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Let me go back to my big old head. I want to thank you guys for spending time and hanging out with me. And again, if you enjoy this channel, if you want to get more live streams, you can join us on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Jeremy, patreon.com/GERIMI. I do bonus live streams twice a month. Those live streams are 2.5 to 3 hours long. We do art book study group where we work through some of the best art books, educational art books out there, and I just sit down and study with them and talk with you guys while I do it. So you can get all of that, and you can read my comic books digitally on Patreon. All of that and more for as little as $2 a month. Head on over, sign up, see if there's a tier that looks interesting to you. You can get a free digital sketchbook. Has the first 3 issues of Morningstar in sketchbook form, my rough layouts, but letters. You can read that, get a taste for my working process. And I also send out work in progress animated GIFs, little blog posts and thoughts about creative process, links to some of these live streams. All of that gets delivered to your inbox once a month by signing up for my newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you would like to purchase physical copies of my comics, or if you read digitally on Kindle or Comixology, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up my first book, Eye of the Gods, psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. Hence the cover. Get it? He's drowning. He's drowning in visions. It's clever. You can pick up volume 1 of my comic book Morningstar, Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. The whole book is an 8-issue series. This volume has issues 1 through 4, plus bonus material, thumbnails, layouts, script excerpts. And if you go to my main website, my main hub, jeremy.net, you'll find, along with tons of art prints and original art that you guys can purchase, you can also find the final issue of Morningstar, Morningstar issue 8. It's the end of the series. I've got a limited number that are going to be in print. It's also available from Comixology as well. And at some point, I'll have the aforementioned volume 2 that I'm working on assembling. I will have that out there to a purchase on all platforms. All right, guys. Again, I thank you guys for spending time with me while I'm drawing. All of the great conversation and questions and comments. It's always fun. I appreciate you guys coming and hanging out with me. So I hope you guys all have a great weekend. Amar says, in terms of that documentary, since it was before the pandemic, Doghouse says, everyone have a good one. Amar says, laters, and thanks for the stream. Thank you again, guys. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Corey. Thanks, everybody who showed up. Hope you all have a great week, and go be creative.